Hello out there. Welcome here from Autocrit. Hello, everybody. Um, Hello out there. Welcome here from Autocrit. Um, we are doing a lot about fear this month. We are gearing up for Halloween, so we talked about horror as a genre. Today, we're going to go a little bit deeper, and we're going to talk about our anxiety as authors, facing our fears. And we're going to be talking about what it's like to be a writer. What are some of the things that you have to face as a writer, some of the things that make you scared. And we'd love to hear from you too. We have people here from all over, from Canada, from Colorado, from the UK, from Tennessee. We want to hear you as well. So you comment as well. Some of the things that keep you up at night as a writer, besides all the fun things that Gareth tends to talk about in his horror classes. But really, mental state is so important to the creative process. And I have Gareth here to talk about it. He's a little mental, right? No, I'm just kidding. All right, go ahead, Gareth. What do you
A
have to
little
say
bit,
about
a little bit.
this?
Yeah, I do have to agree. Even though, well, we'll get to a few kind of tips as we go about ways of tackling these things. But I think this evening, or today, it's evening for me, today for some, is
We're
really just to
global around here at Autocrit.
to take some time and kind of chat openly with everybody here in the community about some of the things that really kind of hang over you as an author. I guess, as everybody knows, if you've been around Autocrit, everything we try to do is to stay both kind of current, up to date, and realistic. Really being honest with as much as possible. And we thought, well, if we're doing theory stuff all through October for Halloween, why don't we do one that really gets to the honesty of some of the things that can be negative, and see if we can turn them into positives. So I know we have a really great kind of little list this evening to run through and talk about with everybody. But yeah, feel free as we go, chat in the comments. Let us know if any of this plagues you on a daily basis, and certainly share any kind of methods or techniques. How do you get around it? How do you when I say get around it as well, to my perspective, the best thing to do is just to try to kind of spin them in a way.
Mhm.
Can we find a positive side of this or use it for fuel? And there's a little bit of a hint there as to some of the things that I'll do with it, certainly in storytelling and writing in the horror genre, is taking these things and using them as a creative, for creative means, is something that definitely helps. But yeah, I'll let Daniel fire on with our list if you want to begin.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Garrett's point, just right before we get started, one thing I will say is anxiety, in terms of author anxiety, often does come somewhat from a positive place. And that is that you're approaching your work with a certain level of seriousness. And that is something that is a good thing. You should not approach the page so lightly that you're just lackadaisical about it. Even if you're doing it for fun, ultimately, you are trying to create a product for somebody else to enjoy, um, or respond to. And so you do need a certain amount of thought behind that. And don't beat yourself up, first of all, for having these anxieties. A lot of them are very normal, and like I said, even maybe based in a somewhat positive place. And that gets to my first point, which is making sure we take care of ourselves. Sometimes some of these mental blocks that cause us to not be as good of a writer is actually something we can prevent by simply, having a decent schedule, getting a proper night's sleep, making sure you eat. You, as a writer, you can get so focused that I can get to the point where I'll tell my wife, I'm like, I'm so weak, and then she'll be like, well, when did you eat last? And I'm like, oh yeah, I wasn't even thinking about it. I was so in the zone, right, that I wasn't eating. So don't neglect all those basic things. It sounds kind of simple, but it does make a difference, because I can tell you, when I feel regular, healthy overall, it is easier for me to be productive creatively as well. So, anything about that, Gareth, you want to say? Does that ever come up
Well,
with you?
if we're thinking about sort of being honest about it, I'll say there's two major things that I regularly have to deal with because of this. One is dehydration, because I will sit at my desk all day and think, I'll just get over this bit, I'll just get over this bit, I'll finish this bit, and not drink enough water, and get horribly dehydrated and feel awful. And also, I'm a bit of a night owl, and I will often be up writing late when it's quiet. It's like everybody's gone to bed and all of that, and suddenly end up staying up all night. But I have things to do in the day, and I have to go do them. And I think, well, I'll stay up and I'll power through. I'll have some coffee and I'll have a good night's sleep when it gets to tonight. Now, as the years have gone on, that has become more and more impossible, and I can end up wiping myself out for an entire weekend because I didn't sleep for one day. So really, yeah, getting into a rhythm and making sure that you're taking care of yourself, that you are staying hydrated, that you're staying fed, that you're taking the breaks to get up and walk around even. That's where I think something like a Pomodoro timer really does help. It's a block out 30 minutes right for then, get up and walk around, move around for 5 minutes, get a drink, refill, whatever it is you need to do. And of course, sleeping. Deadlines could be a bit of a nightmare for that if you're not really planning it out, but you do have to get let the brain recover.
Yeah. And I'll make a good he mentioned water. I'll make a good note here for protein. Protein can be very helpful to stabilize your mood. If you find you're ebbing and flowing, try more protein. I'm not a health professional, but I just find it helps. Fear of rejection probably is the number one thing that people are anxious about, and that is that they're going to go through all of this effort, and it's going to be for no purpose in their mind because they're just going to get rejected. Nobody's going to care about it. Nobody's going to publish it. Nobody's going to want it. And it's obviously such a like stupefying feeling, right? Like you start having fear of rejection. Well, you just prevent yourself from doing just about anything. And the way I think about it is fear of rejection really comes from a thinking you're not at a level of quality that should matter to anybody else. And I think that to some extent is partially because you're smart enough to realize that there is a certain level that you need to get to, which is a good thing. The negative thing is making assumptions about where your level's at, which may or may not be correct, but also neglecting the fact that even if, let's say, you're 100% right and what you're working on right now is not good enough to release, that doesn't mean you shouldn't write it. In fact, that's more of a reason to write it because that is that practice to get to that level. You're not going to, nobody would expect somebody to sit at a piano and just play a symphony the first time out, right? So you are practicing. So there really is, in my opinion, no such thing as wasted time at a keyboard. You are still practicing. What do you think, Gareth?
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it there, 100%. The fear of rejection is prevalent. I don't think to some degrees that it ever goes away. If I have been contracted, let's say, to write something, if I'm working on a project and we're going on pages basis, as part of the Nightmare Fuel course, I've talked about working on a graphic novel project, for example, and sending 10 pages at a time to be signed off on the other end, and then we continue with the rest. Every single time you hit send, it's terrifying. It's what's going to happen. Is this good? Is it not? I'm not really 100% sure. I think we always have that sense of self-criticism,
Right.
and never really being sure, but you just have to do it. And we've seen personally, and I have seen a few members, sorry to call you out here, but Tom, who's just a great
Hi,
member
Tom.
of the audit community, has said multiple times, having taken part in Nightmare Fuel, never really until that point had the confidence in his abilities to submit anywhere, and pretty much within days had his first, published piece placed somewhere. And more after that, very quickly after that. So really a case of getting the confidence. And the one way to break that too is to get over that initial fear of rejection that comes from even letting anyone beta read it. If you've written a piece and you don't go seeking feedback from the right people too, that's because you don't want them to hate it. It's just the fear of rejection on a lower level. Not that it's professional rejection, but it's somebody telling you that your stuff's not good. And sometimes that is a possibility, that the feedback may be it's not working or you need to fix this. But how is that negative? Again, you have to turn that around to the positive. Is somebody has just highlighted an issue that you can fix, that you can work on, that will make your work better, and that will take you then to the next level. But of course, to the next level, when I say submitting a piece to a publisher, to an anthology, anything like that, it's going to be terrifying every time you hit send. You just kind of have to, bite down on something there, send it, and hope for the best. And a rejection isn't condemnation. Most of the time it's not condemnation. It's simply it doesn't fit, but it's still good
Mhm.
work. Send it somewhere else. Keep trying. Keep going.
Mhm.
Really, really just keep going. Be persistent. But yeah,
Yep.
somebody's got to have to. You're gonna have to let people look at it. You're gonna have to take on board the feedback, and not really worry too much about that sense of rejection. I have seen others too in class who have just sent me their work behind the scenes. Where like I didn't really want to share it with a bigger group, and were over the moon when I read it and thought that's excellent. Maybe there's one or two little tweaks I would make in here, but your writing is solid. The story really comes together. Uh, this is really good stuff. And
Mhm.
there are people who have sat there and thought, I can't write. I don't know how to write, when it was completely untrue.
Mhm. Yeah, no, for sure. And that gets to the next point, which is taking criticism. This is something that gives us a lot of anxiety, right? Because we want it and we don't want it, right? And it's not even that we're as simple as we just want the positive. Everybody knows, unless you're a complete whatever egotist or something, everybody knows that there's work to be done, there's improvements. And not only that, we don't really want to stagnate, we want to get better. So it's not that we don't want anything negative to be said exactly. The problem is is what is negative said, right? Is when the negative comes from left field. It really triggers us because we just didn't see that negative criticism coming. Um, the other problem too is that criticism can sometimes be very poor, right? So you have to sort through that. You have to sort through figuring out what to take from it, what's not really worthwhile, what's just somebody had a stomach ache and didn't like your work for that reason, or whatever, or has a vendetta, or is not the right audience. So many reasons why they might give negative criticism. So it's hard to sort through all of that, and that's why I would say you have to be very careful, especially with like writing groups and things like that, as to how you proceed with criticism. It's challenging. You do have to kind of protect yourself a little bit as a newer writer sometimes, just so that you don't cripple yourself with worry about how different people are going to react to your work, because you are going to get a wide variety of things. What it was specifically about criticism, Gareth, what do you think is a good way to kind of filter that, right? To Because obviously not all criticism is going to be beneficial to you. What do there's not like an easy answer, but what are some of the tricks that you use, you think?
Yeah, exactly right. I think, well, number one, most beneficial for me is critic curation,
Mhm.
is the way I
Yes,
would put it,
it's
is
true.
finding the right circle of people
Right.
to critique your work.
That's right.
Certainly in the past, I worked professionally as a critic for almost 15 years and had some really great relationships with publishers who kind of knew that I got where the publication was coming from and the audience. So they knew that if I reacted negatively to something that was in there, that was earnest response. It wasn't just a nitpick or not getting it kind of thing. And I think you have to work that out for yourself as well with the people that you ask to read for you. There's another side of that. Of course, as Daniel said, they're being careful of writing groups. Writing groups can be great places, but there will be people in some of them who simply aren't on the same wavelength, or don't like the genre or don't like your style personally.
Hmm.
And those kind of people, what I look for when I get feedback to gauge if somebody is on that wavelength is if they can justify it, if it's not just slapping me in the face, if it's giving me a good reason why this should
Hmm.
change. And on the flip side of that, there is something, and I can have a problem with this myself quite often, is I'll write something and feel that what I was doing there is a certain technique. It's going to become a darling. And when
Hmm.
somebody criticizes that, I then immediately go on the defensive. The ego comes up, and I'm like, no, 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 no. The reason that's like that is because of this.
Hmm.
Now, sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. But if I can get multiple people pointing out that same spot, well, then I have to accept that it's pretty
Yep.
clear that somebody coming into this piece with fresh eyes is not, I'm not being clear in what I'm doing there. It's not translating to a fresh reader. If that
Mhm.
happens for multiple people, and I got to bite the bullet then and change it. And on the other side of that too is finding the right people to look at it, but you don't want to end up building yourself a circle of yes men,
Mm-mm.
who are like,
No, no,
I
you don't
love
want
your
that
stuff
either.
and everything is perfect.
Mhm.
But similarly, there's also nothing worse than creative by committee, which
Mhm.
is when you're listening to everybody and trying to implement everything.
Mhm.
Your writing really no longer becomes your own, and will try to accommodate. The old saying: if you try to appeal to everyone, you end up appealing to no one. You still have to be
Mhm.
yourself and
Right.
stick to what it was. If people are coming from all different angles, so it's a tough one. Taking
Mhm.
criticism hurts. It does hurt, but again, I would say the easiest step forward into it is, can the critic justify that feedback with a good reason? A
Yep.
good, pragmatic reason that makes sense. And if it does, well, yeah, you should probably think about that.
Right. Yeah, and to Garrett's point about critic curation, one thing I tend to do in terms of the type of people that I listen to is I really pay attention to how they analyze other things. And this is something that you could maybe even kind of do yourself. Like if you're going to get a beta reader or something like that, a writing group, is see how they respond to other things and if it makes sense to you, because it doesn't mean that they're wrong if it doesn't make sense to you. It just means that their view of the world is probably so different than your own that creatively you're going to approach it differently, so you're just not going to be a very good fit, so you're just going to run into them all the time. However, if you see, oh wow, their reaction to this work was so similar to me and they responded in the same way, and they picked up how the author was doing all this, and then they have things to criticize about you, that probably means you're falling short of what you could do yourself. At least that's kind of the way I look at it. And then also in terms of curation, I don't think there's anything wrong with protecting yourself from a certain amount of feedback. I know some authors that will deliberately, not look at things like open places for reviews like Amazon or things like that. They'll have people vet it for them. And I don't think that's the same as what Gareth was talking about in terms of, surrounding yourself with yes men. I think that's just not making yourself wade through most likely garbage. A lot of that stuff, you have no idea why people post a lot of that stuff. And if you have somebody that can kind of help you out and vet a lot of that, then maybe they can tell you, oh, actually there's a trend where a lot of people seem to hate this one aspect. That's helpful to know, but you don't need to read all those personal gross comments. That's probably not going to benefit you. At least
Yeah,
I know it
sometimes
doesn't a lot for a lot of people.
skipping over those things, I can see Jeanette mentioning, it usually takes me a while to look at the criticism objectively and see
That's
they're
true
right.
too. Let it
100%,
sink in.
because it stings. At the initial point, it stings. And it goes to what kind of harkens to what Daniel said there about avoiding, or some authors avoiding, open reviews, not looking through everything on Goodreads and not looking through everything on Amazon. One little tip kind of put in there, as per usual, is don't respond. it's
No,
it's
no,
never
no, no, do
never a
not
good
do that.
idea
Never
to,
helpful.
to start wading in, fists swinging, to bad reviews. It never looks good for the author.
Mhm.
However, in terms of personal emotion, I've always found that no matter, the highest high of your book getting published and those 5-star reviews starting to come in, are still nowhere near as strong as the lows when that 1-star shows up. Even if the 1-star is a load of nonsense when you actually read it, there's some kind, a logical disconnect there. You can try to be fully logical about it, but the emotions will get you, and sometimes that's,
Yeah.
a real good reason just to stay away from it. Let
Mhm.
let the publisher or your agent, whoever, kind of feedback general. Um, like Daniel said, look out for common criticisms and feed that back to you, rather than you scrolling down on a web page looking at 2 stars, 1 stars, because they'll stand out even among 55 stars. They're going to hurt more.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty well psychologically proven, just lots of studies about how negative feedback just hits you more. It's one reason why, hey, go on YouTube right now. How many of videos are about, don't do this, don't do that, things like that. We find that often when we present information in that way, people are more responsive because it's just something that we latch on to more. You say, don't do this, it's a lot. Your mind latches onto it a lot more than the other. It's just the way we work. Um, your inner editor, be very careful about your inner editor, especially during the writing time. There is a time that you kind of need to shut it off a little bit just to be productive, because if it's just barking at you, especially a lot of, well, this isn't good enough and you're awful and all that, you're just going to freeze yourself. It's going to be not productive, or you're going to have a miserable time getting through it. Um, there's a time and a place, and I would say this is kind of the rule of thumb that I tend to do with my inner editor. Is if I'm writing and the inner editor is like, this is just the worst thing I've ever seen in my life, then I'll kind of be like, okay, inner editor, why is it so bad? And if they're like, well, I don't know, it's just horrible, then I'm like, okay, well, shut up, you have nothing to tell me right now, we'll figure it out later. And I just press on, because what it is maybe it's right and there was something wrong, but if I can't even identify what it is, what's the point of listening to it right now? I'm going to have to spit it out and then I'll figure it out in post, right? Or the inner editor is just my anxiety that perhaps I'm not good enough, and it's going to completely go away once I finish it. So that's how I tend to deal with the inner editor. What about you, Gareth?
Yeah, usually 100% anxiety. As you're putting something new down, it's you got to shut it off. Especially as Daniel was saying, for a first draft, it's not going to be that. You essentially just, well, what I say to it anyway when it comes up is I will get stuck and I will start polishing the past 4 lines or so, and just like, this isn't coming together the way I really wanted it to. I was talking with our class last night about this actually, and the thing that I do now to keep that in check is during first drafts, make sure that I've got what I call order of information correct. That
Mm,
the details and how a scene is actually playing out in the mind's eye, kind of visually, is in the correct order, that it can be followed, that it isn't just a mess of images that don't make any sense together. That'll usually be the first draft. Then come back and introduce more sensory detail, more setting detail, start to actually turn it into the kind of written prose or narrative prose that one would expect in a novel. So it's kind of goes from almost screenplay to more deeply written novel-esque stuff, and then I'll start to introduce more character into the narrative as well, to kind of breathe more life into it. And those are all different passes, all different stages. So you just have to say, as we're going through, great writing, the old classic quote, great writing is rewriting.
mm-hmm.
And you have to understand that. Otherwise, you can
There's also a
absolutely
saying that
paralyze
too.
yourself.
I'm a better rewriter than a writer. I
Yeah.
don't think that's unique to you, Salissa. I think that's pretty much true for everybody.
I think it's almost a universal. I'm sure there are some proteges out there who are just,
That we
"Well,
all
let's
hate. Yes, no, I'm just
just
kidding.
sit down and drop it all out immediately." Perfect. But very, very few, I would say. Um, and the real thing about it, yeah, shut it up. Tell it to shut up. And it is rooted. It's rooted in, well, both the anxiety of feeling that you're not good enough, but also the lack of confidence that comes from that.
Yep.
And like I said earlier, if you let that get on top of you, it can stop you submitting things, sending out things, really
Yep.
getting involved with writing that is very good. That
Yeah,
you are actually very good.
absolutely. And honestly, it's like the fear of embarrassment, which I didn't specifically call out, but it comes with that, right? It comes with you're not good enough. You're going to put stuff out there, you're going to be embarrassed. But here's the thing: the best way, in my opinion, to get over a fear of embarrassment is just deliberately embarrass yourself. I'm not kidding. Like, find ways to embarrass yourself, because you need to get. It's really helpful if you can get over the fear of embarrassment, because it's such an empowering thing in life if you stop worrying about it. Because the truth of the matter is you'll be okay. People do embarrassing things all the time, and then they wipe themselves off and then they move on. Like,
And
and
everybody,
once you master that, it's so much easier. It's so much easier if you go through life and you're just not worried about embarrassing yourself.
I'm sure a lot of people here watching as well have seen our videos on the channel with Daniel and all his costumes and wacky setups and everything as well.
Clearly, I have no.
It's good.
But no, but you know what? Sometimes it's just speaking personally of some of the stuff I do. It's like, yeah, this is a little silly. It's a little contrived. Are people even gonna like it? They're just gonna think it's dumb. But it's like, why not? Why not try it? And you know what? I'm not gonna guarantee that you're gonna respond positively to all the little different things that we do here or I do here. But on the other hand, not trying it at all would make our presentations a lot more dull, a lot less interesting, and perhaps prevent some really great or creative ways of teaching out there. So no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to continue to embarrass myself.
Exactly right. And I think this shutting up your inner editor too, it keeps you active and it keeps you in the driving seat. When you're actively saying shut up, like not giving into it. And I think,
Yes.
to be honest, it's quite frankly, from my perspective, better to have that nagging in the back of your head as you're going along and actively keeping it quiet, than to be sitting there, going, "Oh, this is amazing. This is perfect. I'm not
Hmm.
going to have to edit this at all. The whole thing is a masterpiece," because that's
Absolutely.
usually a massive sign of Dunning-Kruger, and you don't want to go in that
Hmm.
direction.
Yes, Dunning-Kruger pulling out the psychology. I love it. But yes, it's so true. If for those of you who know what that little graph, if you're there on the little canyon, well, you're a lot further off than the people in what do they call like the mountain of stupidity or whatever. You don't, and so it's good. It's good that you have a certain amount of respect to how difficult it is. That's a good thing. The problem is that you can forget because you have a sense of how difficult it is, how much better you are than people that are just putting no thought into it whatsoever. And so don't forget that. Don't forget that. To Garrett's point, the fact that you're concerned shows that you're already better than a few people at least. And that gets to what I call the fear of execution. This is where in my opinion what happens is an author has an idea and they're like, this is a killer idea, this is like a best selling idea, it is amazing, and if only I was the best author to do it, but I'm not, but I'm going to try, but I'm just not sure, and it just completely wrecks them. And I think one of the best things you can do about this is realize is kind of diminish that idea in your head. Realize that the idea is probably not as super spectacular as you think, in that you need to like put it on this pedestal. But on the other hand, like I said earlier, let's say you aren't good enough to execute it. That's fine. Do it anyway. You can always trunk it and come back to it later. Nothing wrong with that. But you might find out once you finish, it's not as bad as you thought.
I was about to say fear of execution. Well, this took a dark turn when that came up.
Yeah,
But yes,
right.
I think this is true. And something else as well is if a story, if an idea or a concept, as you are fleshing it out, seems to become too much for you, I'd always say as well, find yourself a partner. If
Mm.
there's somebody that you trust that can work through stories with you, of course, to do the requisite plug, of course, at AutoCrit, we have story coaching and story doctor sessions, so you can drop in and talk about it with a professional. And what you're really looking for is somebody who can help you flesh that out, can really help you
Mhm.
iron out the different elements of a story, but not from a perspective of a partner, somebody who says, this is how I would write it. You're not looking
Mhm.
for somebody that you're going to say, okay, we'll write a chapter each and it's a shared book or it's a
Right.
shared story. Not the case. You want somebody who
Yeah.
can help coach you through that, can help ask the important questions that you need to fill in those frustrating gaps,
Mhm.
and then give you a better sense of the story to continue. That's something that's incredibly valuable. I
Mhm.
have a number of friends that I will do that with on a regular basis. And sometimes we're sitting there together and we're like, this just doesn't actually work. So move on to something else. Don't sit there smashing your head on a desk in frustration.
Mhm.
It's okay. Well, we kind of come to a little bit of a consensus because we know each other, we trust each other, we're asking the right questions, but it's not gelling. So
Mhm.
move on to something different. And I think that's what's, as Daniel said there, sometimes the idea isn't as mind blowing as you thought it was, and that's how you find it. You
Mhm.
you noodle around, you dig around inside it and try to put it out in a proper structure and figure it out, and all that connective tissue in between,
Yep.
and it just doesn't work. It's like, well, okay,
Yep.
it felt like a great idea, but it's not. It's more of
Yeah.
a
The
mess.
reason you're seeing the problem with the execution is not a lack of you, it's that the idea needs to be tweaked or dramatically changed. And that's also something in terms of, a lot of I would say the vast majority of writers don't tend to be people that outline well in advance. They tend to be more creative, discovery writers or gardener types. They go with the flow. But one thing with this is that I think they're more likely to fall into this sort of a box because they don't see the work as some sort of collective whole. They can kind of see it as this nebulous concept. And the fact that they don't have a finger on what it is yet is causing that anxiety too. So that's where I would say, especially for a discovery writer, if your worry is that you're just not going to be able to do it justice, just try to do it and then go back and figure it out. If you're more of a planner type, then one way you'll know you can do it justice is if you've done all those beats and it makes sense to you, then you can fix the rest in post. But for a discovery writer, I think it's more likely to come up because they may be, and the truth is you may not even really know what your story is, and that's just what you're catching on to, which is fine, but figure it out as you go, just get it out there. We have some people commenting about NaNoWriMo. Yes, we have NaNoWriMo coming up next month. And that's one reason why we were specifically talking about, yes, fear of writing. Yes, telling the editor to shut up during NaNoWriMo is crucial. Yes, absolutely. In terms of productivity, it's gonna kill you in a heartbeat. No good. No good. And we'll have a lot more to say about that as we get into NaNoWriMo. All right, so let's get to imposter syndrome. Yes. This is where, again, what Gareth was talking about, this fear that you don't measure up. And this can really cripple you in terms of interacting with others. Because where I see imposter syndrome come up a lot is you're just not good enough in comparison to whoever you're with. So you might be with a very talented, creative individual that would love to hear about your work, maybe even be somebody that could mentor you, and you're just terrified to tell them that you're even a writer because how dare you even mention such a thing in their presence. And I'm not saying there isn't a certain amount of, overdoing it and pushing your stuff on something, but I'm specifically talking about people that are just so cloistered because they're just so scared to share anything that they hurt themselves from a lot of opportunity. Have you seen that, Gareth?
Yeah, yeah. Imposter syndrome is probably, I think, nestled at the heart of very, very many of these fears. It almost is the kind of muck from which they sprout,
Hmm.
and it's a real tough one. Personally, for dealing with that, there's still times when I have to deal with it. It's like I don't. Part of imposter syndrome is uh, just believing that you don't belong there. It's
Hmm.
that you're receiving accolade or praise that you don't deserve.
Right.
Oftentimes, that one is quite easy to reconcile because you're getting it. Yes, you deserve it. Um, it's like fine. Has this person who's saying really nice things about you or about this thing that you've done? Do they know you personally? Are they like a close friend? Well, if they're not, well, you quite clearly deserve that response.
Yeah. Right.
So own it, take it. Don't be afraid
Yeah.
to use it. But
Right.
also, on the other hand, you can't really kind of use that to feed your ego, because I found with imposter syndrome, one of the easiest ways around that is just losing ego entirely, and that means also not to my, I'm not going to say this is a universal that everybody will get away with it, but to my mind too, is not respecting the egos of others.
Mm.
Whenever I go into a space, I don't want to avoid imposter syndrome. I will not let anyone's head get too big, if you know what I
Hmm.
mean.
Yeah.
It's just kind of
Right.
within there, and I consider, we're in a room, and whether it's a business relationship, we're all peers at the end of the day,
Hmm.
and we're working
Right.
together, and we deserve to be on the same level,
Right.
and dealing with peers too. Okay, well,
Right.
somebody has sold X many books. The way around that and to think is that you're always at some point on, let's just consider the rungs of a ladder, and essentially a ladder that never ends. And
Hmm.
you look up, there's people there. If you look down, there's people there as well.
Yeah.
There are going to be people who are starting from scratch right now,
Yeah.
who will uh, benefit from some of your advice, from some of your experience that you've made so far. And that does not diminish the fact that you can look up and see other people up there.
Right.
So really keep that in mind. That's I think a great way to help balance out imposter syndrome. And I don't think it always goes away, because it ties directly into that whole pressing send and gritting your teeth
Yeah.
kind of thing
It's
too.
true. I think a lot of it comes from a certain amount of self-respect too. You have to have, especially again with a lot of things we're talking about, what Gareth was saying earlier. If you're sitting there at the keyboard and you're concerned that what you're doing isn't quality, then that means you're working. It does. It may be fun work, you might enjoy it, but it's work, right? And you need to have a certain amount of self-respect that you are trying, your best at the work to provide something for others. There's something to that just on the face of it, right? And essentially, to Garrett's point, that's what all these artists are doing, right? Just because some have been acknowledged about it more, and you might think that they're better at it than you. That doesn't that doesn't mean at a base human level there's something better about them as a person, right? They might be more refined in their talent, but it helps, I think, if you think of it, if you kind of bring them down to earth a little bit in terms of just as people. As people, if we're all trying hard at the work, then that means essentially we're all the same. Even as we acknowledge the fact that some people might uh, skill wise be better at it, maybe they've done it longer or whatever. But I don't think that's what imposter syndrome is at, because what the way I see it crippling people, it's not just the fact that it's like, oh, this person is more skilled than I am, because that doesn't stop you from talking to somebody who's more skilled than you are. What really stops you is when you feel like, who am I to do this? Like, I'm just so beneath them. And that's where I think you really got to nip that in the bud. Because again, I mean, not that it's easier said than done, right? But you really have to fight against that, because you don't want it to limit your ability to get help from others, to communicate, to throttle yourself unfairly, or anything like that. It's just not helpful. Any other thoughts, Gareth?
No, I was thinking exactly that. It was a good way to end it. It's ultimately, especially in personal situations with having a chat with someone and things like that. You don't need to earn an access card to be there for a
Nope.
conversation.
Nope. Nope. All right, so this is another interesting author fear, and this is fear of content. This is specifically when somebody's like, well, generally I'm a good writer, but I'm awful at writing X. I'm awful at at romance plots. I'm awful at writing violence. Maybe you don't want to write a sex scene or something like that because you're uncomfortable. This is an interesting path because it's different from person to person. And I think there's a certain amount of wisdom to it, in that I don't think all writers are necessarily equally good at all things, right? And so kind of knowing where your limitations are can be helpful. However, you don't want it to limit yourself so much that you never try certain things, or you box yourself in too much. You need to be careful about that. And then also, just in terms of, I'm really a fan of what Stephen King says. He says, you can write about whatever you want, but it needs to be the truth. Uh, I do think that sometimes authors are maybe a little bit afraid to really go out there with certain content, just because it's touchy, it's sensitive, and I don't mean like offensive stuff necessarily, but I just mean like, real visceral sort of material. You can sometimes keep yourself from being as honest on the page, just because to some degree you're revealing something about yourself. You're revealing the kind of things you would find funny, or the kinds of ways you think about things, and that troubles you. And I think you've got to be careful that that doesn't stop you too much. What do you think, Gareth?
Yeah, well, I was going to say as soon as the kind of fear of content, I was like, I'm not the person to engage
Yeah,
on this
that's
one.
like how I have a fear of I'm over my fear of embarrassment. Gareth is definitely over the fear of content, from exposure therapy, because he's been exposed to just about any type of content there
Pretty much.
is, right?
But I would say one thing: I would never, I do not, I would never write a sex scene. I can't do that
Mm,
with any kind of decorum or
yeah,
skill that I've seen in other books. And of
right.
course, when you say about kind of exposure therapy, and all my life, of course, reading horror and hardcore horror stuff, and a lot of the whenever some of those authors got into sex, it's just to me unnecessarily graphic and odd and uncomfortable. Doesn't really need to be there. So that's
Mhm,
kind of a lot of the writing I've seen on it, and then the steamy side. So I just avoid that altogether. So perhaps a little bit of fear of content there for me, but otherwise,
mhm,
I think whatever it is that you're that means something to you, write about it.
yep.
Get it out of you, and I'm always an advocate for that. No matter who you are, your perspective is valuable on any kind of topic that you want to talk about, and wrap that up in a story. Get it out of your mind.
Yeah, because I mean, here's the fun thing about writing: nobody ever has to see it, right? So instead of saying, "Hey, I'm gonna write a book," and you're going to whatever, instead you're like, I don't write scary scenes well, so I'm just gonna kind of, skip around this or whatever. Well, why don't you just try it? Try writing that scary scene, or I'm just gonna fade to black, and they're gonna wake up and something has occurred, a sex scene or a violent scene that I just don't feel comfortable writing. Why don't you try writing a little bit of that, depending on what it is? To Garrett's point, you could be speaking to something where going there is going to change the tone of your work. It's going to change who you are as an artist. And I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just trying to get you to not be everything that you can be as an artist. There's nothing wrong with knowing where your wheelhouse is or where your comfort level is. And to Garrett's point, if you're not that comfortable, well, it is probably going to be pretty bad. But just be careful that you don't let it be an out to prevent your creative growth. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, true. I can see, some talking in the comments there. I think that's a really great comment there from S. Gray. Going back to the imposter syndrome, uh, absolutely nailed it there. I think it is important to get that perspective. Know that you're looking at someone. You could be almost starstruck. You're like, I don't have a right to talk
Mhm.
to this person. They're so much better than me. They are thinking the exact same thing, looking on at somebody else. It's that whole
Yeah,
ladder thing. There's always someone below and someone above,
yeah.
for everyone. For
And it can't
everyone.
even be you, to be perfectly honest. I mean,
Yeah.
granted, the odds that somebody that's at a certain level may not know you, but you don't know how they're going to react to your work. They could very well read your work and be like, wow, that was really well written. I wish I could have come up with that sentence. You never know.
Yep. And when it comes to the fear of content thing as well, is when I say about sharing your perspective on things and getting it out there, you will always find this is a world full of people, individual personalities, each with their own baggage and quirks and attitudes. And if you put something out there into the world and you ask people to read it, especially creatively, then you're open to any and all kind of reactions too. Um, that kind of fear has to be dropped, and I think that fear goes into the fear of broaching certain content or talking about things that you would like to talk about. Personally, I think the creative aspect of it is more important than
Mhm.
the one or two people out there who will find any reason they can without knowing anything about you to say that this is not yours to say. um, Again, I don't think it's an entirely hard line there, but of course, if 5,000 people are appreciating the fact that you brought something up in a story and one person is losing
Yep.
their mind because of it, that's
Yep.
my house isn't going to explode because of that.
Nope. Right. And that's not the same thing to be conscientious of things. I'm not,
Exactly
you know,
right. Exactly right. Yeah.
certainly be conscientious of things. All right. So let's get into stuff that comes up a little bit more late. That comes a little bit later in your writing career. Maybe after you have a little bit of success under your belt, or you're starting to put your work out there. One thing I find is fear of expectations. This happens when a writer puts out something and it goes over fairly well. But now it's almost worse because it's like, well, now I've got to perform on demand because people have this expectation of me as a writer and I have to match that. And can I do it again? Right. And of course, the answer is, well, you were able to do it one time. So probably, or even better. But then there's also the point of, well, you just got to press forward anyway. Like, you don't know until you know. Right. So why borrow trouble? But it can be challenging, especially in a series, right? If you're writing a series, and again, a lot of people don't necessarily outline the whole thing, so they maybe are working on the first book, and then let's say you self-publish your first book and it goes pretty well, and then you're like, oh, I got to keep this momentum up. That can be a lot of anxiety then on your shoulders when you work on book two and book three, because now you actually, it's almost like, well, the first time it's like nobody expected anything from it, they thought it was going to be garbage, but now it's like, oh, they think I'm actually kind of decent. Uh-oh, what does it mean to be a decent writer? It kind of changes things a little bit, don't you think?
Yeah,
What do you think?
absolutely. One
Okay.
thing I would say about this really too is, expectations aren't yours to control.
Yep,
And that's one
it's true.
thing with a lot of these anxieties and fears is we're trying to hold control over things that are outside of your control, and what other people expect of you is again completely outside of your control. But this is also this is kind of the reason for the whole term, the sophomore slump. When something that first book is amazing and then the critical reaction to the second isn't all that good because expectations have built up. That's not the author's fault.
Nope.
They just wrote a really good book, and I think it's quite
Yep.
unfair to then say, "Oh, they're in the sophomore slump."
Yep.
That's kind of as a critic, that doesn't feel useful to me. That's
Mm-mm.
kicking them in the shins for no reason,
Yeah.
because they didn't build that expectation. One of the
Right.
funniest things that always goes into my mind. This is kind of unrelated, but I was listening to years and years ago a series of these prank calls that are recorded. That you find them all over YouTube and whatnot, but. One of the prank callers was talking to somebody from a government body, I believe, and they were looking for money, and they said, "So I can expect that check next week or whatever." And they were, and the response was, "Well, you can expect it whenever you like." That doesn't mean it's going to
Right.
turn up, and
It's true.
that 100%. Every time I think of something like this, it's like, oh, what's expected? That just tells me that comes to my mind and makes me laugh. And I think
Mhm.
again, you can expect whatever you like, but that's not the reality that's placed on the shoulders of the author.
Yeah. And I can think of so many creative people that have had a little bit of a tough time. Like, they've had a huge success and they've had a little bit of a tough time after. I know, like, Walt Disney, he had Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and the next films are now considered artistic successes at the time, they didn't financially perform as well, and he said for a while he hated the first movie because it was so successful, it like sucked all the oxygen on the room. And then there's other people too, like you could point to somebody like J.K. Rowling, who's moved on to detective fiction, which is completely different than what she was writing before. She's not making the billions of dollars she was with her first series, but it's not, it is what it is, right? It's what is an artist's choice. So um like Garrett said, you can't control people's expectations. It doesn't make them less successful because of that, artistically necessarily. And to some degree, you're gonna just have to do what you're gonna do, and you'll find out. Um, it's almost like it's almost, to me, I think of it almost the opposite. I'm like, well, if I put out something and it just went like gangbusters, it's like I'd almost expect, well, I'm not gonna hit lightning the same way twice. So now I have the freedom to do something that's not gonna be as well received. I don't know. I guess it's a little defeatist, but to me, it's like I just wouldn't worry about it as much. But I know for some people, it really does bother them an awful lot.
Yeah, yeah. It could be seen as defeatist. I prefer to flip it around and just think of it as alleviating a bit of
Yeah.
pressure. Do not
Right.
necessarily hold it on your shoulders, because
Right.
expectations will be what they will be, and that's
Right.
that's nothing to do with you, unless you
Yeah.
promised something, of course.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah,
directly
the
promise something
expectations
and
of
don't
the
deliver
readers
well.
in a series is something obviously you have to be well aware of. You don't want to completely pivot on them. All right, what about fear of deadlines? This again comes up when you are maybe more in the career mode, right? Is now you have to perform on demand. So you were going along your business, you were writing at whatever schedule you took whatever 10 years for that first book, and now it's doing well, and now it's like where's the follow up, and you have to do it under pressure. This can be fear inducing because you're having to adjust your thinking. And this is where, kind of going back to the first point, putting in some good practices early on in terms of how to be productive as a writer can be very helpful, because then you can fall back on, okay, well, I'm just going to continue doing what it is. And that is, I put out this sort of amount and everything. And even though now you have a hard date, if you just have a system in place, at least you're used to that. Even if the system wasn't necessarily to get you to a hardline deadline that a boss was looming over you, at least you're not completely pivoting. But anyway, it's something you have to deal with. Gareth, what about fear of deadlines, doing stuff under pressure, time crunch?
Always, always. It's the it's the cause of procrastination.
It is.
Self-fulfilling prophecy. When you see
Yep.
that deadline coming and you freak out about it, and then you procrastinate just to
Yep.
make it worse. It's
Yep.
self-punishment.
Yep.
And you kind of have to cut on to that. You don't go, oh well, I know what I'm doing here. I'm procrastinating, and I need to stop it.
Hmm.
There are lots of things you can do for that. For example, mentioned earlier the Pomodoro timer. You can Google for one of those. Make sure you just set yourself 30 minutes at a time, and then wander about for 5 minutes in between those sessions. But you're ultimately going to have to get it done. And there's also some websites and things you can use to lock down like social media, so you're not procrastinating on there. That's probably the number one writer's fault is, oh, my mind is wandering, so I'll just go check what's happening on Facebook. 3 hours later,
Yep.
or YouTube, and here we are on YouTube 3 hours later,
Yeah.
and the writing hasn't gotten done.
Yep.
Same thing with you can get apps
Yep.
for your mobile phone that will lock it down between certain hours. So it's kind of an active thing that you have to, you do have to do the
Yeah.
work and prepare for it. But I think it's the pain of that, of sorting those kind of things out and just doing the work, is much, much less than the self-inflicted pain of procrastinating your way to a deadline that you could see coming.
I also think it can be less problematic for a person than the self-inflicted pain of productivity before you have kind of an established career. Because what I think happens a lot of times with writers that aren't like writers, they're writing kind of as a hobby or whatever, but they're not monetizing it, or there's no regular schedule or anything, is that they can just feel like they're not successful because they have no measurement of success, right? And so that's why I recommend, no matter where you are in your writing level, is come up with a system. And I don't mean a goal in terms of, well, I'm going to complete a novel in so much time, although that can be helpful. But I think of more of like systems of, okay, I'm going to get so much writing done in a certain amount of time, or things like that, because then you can always point to it and you can say, yeah, I am writing as much as I set out to do, so I can give myself a little pat on the back. So I think otherwise, I know somebody commented earlier that they have a fear they're not writing enough. I think you can just end up with a fear. It's like, well, what am I actually doing? I'm like, yeah, I'm a hobbyist writer, but like, what is this? And I think you kind of needed to establish what this is to yourself so you can have that personal pride. Yeah, I'm getting stuff done, at whatever level you're at.
Yeah, let's think about what it actually means to you to
Hmm.
do this, and set
Yeah,
that as the longer goal. So, of course, your
right.
short term goals are this achievement leading on to a deadline. One thing you can do as well, like Daniel was saying there, if you're writing in the just as a kind of hobbyist and you're writing your first things that one day you hope to get placed somewhere and sell and all of this, well, you might need to set your own deadlines for these things because
Yeah,
you're essentially your own boss in that space,
right.
and you just do that for yourself and make sure you stick to them. It's a good, it's a good way to get into a professional mindset early as
Mhm.
well. If you can do that and manage to overcome the curse of procrastination and work to deadlines as though you're your own boss looking over you, I can see. S in the comments there was, if you set your mind right, writing deadlines for writing are no worse for those at work. Mind you, your work deadline sucks, so maybe it's not the best example. However, I would turn that around
Yeah,
and
but it's
say
a, it's
it
a
is
it's a
work.
necessary evil, as it were. It's just it's only annoying because it essentially takes it seriously. But if you want to take it seriously to the point where you're going to beat yourself up because you're not doing it enough, then take it seriously enough to come up with a benchmark. That's my thought.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm always an advocate as well of. I think I may have mentioned it in past events with of the accomplishment cycle. Reward yourself for reaching the
Hmm.
deadlines, if even
Yep.
if they're self-set. If you think, okay,
Yep.
well, by this Friday, I'm going to have put down 10,000 words. First draft, again, they're not perfect. First draft, 10,000 words. I'm going to blast that this week. Done on Friday. If you're done by your deadline on Friday, you get yourself a reward. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter how big or small it is, just something
Nope.
that you personally feel happy that now you have
Right.
that you've accomplished that.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, we're basic systems, right? Work within the system. All right, the last one I want to talk about is kind of a weird one, but in the sphere of success, there actually is a concern sometimes that I think keeps people from putting stuff out there, and that is they don't know what to do if they're the next J.K. Rowling. Not that that's likely to happen, or Stephen King or whatever. They're almost, I guess it's like a fear of notoriety. It's like they feel like there'll be this tremendous sense of
We may have
I think
lost
I died.
Daniel. Oh, you're back. You're back.
Oh, I'm here, right? Am I back?
I can hear you again. Yes, you're moving.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes. No, a fear that you'll reach some sort of level and then there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on you because you've been elevated to some sort of status, and you may say, well, that's really presumptuous, but I think sometimes in the back of your head people are maybe a bit worried about such things, or even what to do with it. Like, what does it mean when you're making your living off of books or even a certain amount of money after, but like it can really mess with your head a little bit. I don't know, what do you think, Gareth?
Yeah, I think it's definitely kind of built in there. To me, it seems like a kind of fear of the expectation of additional responsibilities that are when it's uh, at the moment are immaterial. So
Right.
it's an anxiety kind of thing. It's like I don't
Hmm.
know. All I believe is that this is going to take place a lot more responsibility upon me, but I don't know what those are. I don't know what they're going to be, and I don't know if I can handle that because it's all immaterial. Personally, to me, it's like thinking of it that way is spend a minute, get more logical about it. If it's immaterial, why does it matter right now?
Right.
um, Move towards it. Just
Yeah.
just go for it. Everybody, I think, at the end of the day, wants to be successful too, but
Hmm.
that fear of the unknown kind of sits next to that and goes, well, when I get there, oh. And I can see Lisa commenting, yeah, as well. The fear of accountability. If I get it right the first time, I have to get
Yeah,
it right
that
all
gets
the
to
time.
expectations again, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
you did
just
a really
more
great
stuff.
job, you got to do that same job the same way next time or even better. Yeah, it's
Yeah, and
tough.
then but when you think about that as well, it's or what. It's like, or we'll be very disappointed in you.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
true.
well,
It's true.
how does that
And that's
really
where
change things?
embarrassment comes in too, right? How many artists have fallen flat on their face and been fine. Really, like over and over again, you can point to examples of people that just put out something and it's just a disaster and they just roll right along, you know. I mean, I suppose you can maybe point to some careers that have been ruined because of a major disaster, but I'm trying to think of any off the top of my head artistically that they weren't able to pick up the pieces, and I'm not really coming up with anything off the top of my head.
Yeah,
So
the career-ending failure.
mm-mm.
It very
No,
rarely
usually it's
happens.
more like, you know, like it's just an embarrassment that they just don't want to ever speak of ever again, and you bring it up at conventions, and they're like, "Haha, wasn't that stupid?" And then they just
Yeah,
move on.
it can happen occasionally. I've seen it in the filmmaking world, where something
Mhm,
has seriously bombed and basically ended careers.
mhm,
However, a lot of the time that wasn't because this project bombed and all of a sudden nobody will work with this writer anymore.
right,
It's personal. It's more personal reasons on their side that they took it very hard, or things just changed in their life and they disappeared. It's not that the movie bombed and therefore they
right,
never worked again.
right.
That is hardly ever, if ever, the
Yeah.
actual reason.
Oh yeah, I know of plenty of artistic careers cut short because the person was not somebody you could work with. You know, a production, a personal reason, a business reason. They were not very professional, but artistic disaster, I don't know. That's hard for me to
Yeah,
pinpoint.
it's almost never the actual artistry that caused the collapse or
Mhm.
caused the career to end. It's either interpersonal or just plain personal that changes it up. So don't be afraid of the world crashing in on you
No.
once you're successful, because it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think of Linus and the boy named Charlie Brown. He's like, the world didn't come to an end. Like that's the kind of feeling that's the attitude you need to have. So yes, to Gareth's point, yes, once you get to a certain level and people have expectations of you, so
And
what?
in many cases, failure, this may sound trite, but I believe 100% failure is the price of success
Yeah,
in many cases, because it's a learning path.
yeah.
So many, even outside of
Like
the
the
creative fields,
Sports Illustration curse, right?
yeah, how many seriously successful business people have built that off failure after failure, learning
Hmm.
the whole way around.
Yep.
I also work writing professionally. I also work in the copywriting space, in promotional writing, and there are so many people that are kind of in that niche that are essentially superstars. Everybody's looking up to them. It's like, oh, the $35 million writer over there. That success was from maybe two super hit promos out of 200 that crashed and
Right.
burned. They just
Yep.
happened to get it right that time.
Hmm. Yep.
So don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid
Nope.
of it. Success or
No.
failure, I suppose.
Nope. Exactly. All right. So those were some fears about author anxiety, and we're going to continue talking about fears here at AutoCrit. Next week, we're going to be discussing some sort of horror novel, right, Gareth? I think it's still mysterious, right? Keeping that
It's
under
a little
wraps.
mysterious. I dropped
Ooh.
a hint about it in Mighty Networks. If it's kind
Ooh.
of
For
it's
those.
kind of buried in there somewhere, but somebody
Ooh.
somebody recently mentioned what the book actually is.
Mm.
But we'll be revealing that a little later in the week. It's our Halloween special, essentially. So we're picking a brand new horror publication that we will dig into
Nice.
or
And
exhume.
Gareth. Zoom. And Gareth was talking about Mighty Networks. That's our AutoCrit community. If you're not an AutoCrit member, why not? You should join, and you can become a member. And we have a actual workshop this Friday about phobias, fears, and weaving them into a story, and how to do that in maybe obvious ways and less obvious ways. So I'm very excited, as Gareth is a master at that.
We do. We have that coming up on Friday, which will be for AutoCrypt Pro members only. So we're getting together for a quick little hour-long workshop, figuring out how to effectively wrap phobias into horror stories or base horror stories on phobias, and stories that actually work and aren't so on the nose.
Mhm.
And following on from that, the week after, because again, it is October, we're going to have a members-only presentation on cosmic horror. So we'll be looking into some great examples of that genre and the tropes and kind of character archetypes and how to build stories that are through and through cosmic horror as a subgenre. So if that sounds interesting and you're into all that this month, grab yourself an AutoCrypt Pro membership and we'll see you there.
Nice. And if you're not into horror so much, well, you can still become an AutoCrypt Pro member because we're going to be doing a lot of AutoCrypt Pro member events for a little known event called National Novel Writing Month. Maybe you've heard of it. We're going to be doing that all throughout November. Accountability programs, things to jostle your mind for writing purposes to keep you chugging along on all of that. So yeah, this is a great time to become an AutoCrypt member. So check it out. Otherwise, please like and subscribe, hit the bell on this YouTube channel for more content here on YouTube, which we will continue to be rolling along on Tuesdays. And we will see you around. Thank you
Yes.
very much, Gareth.
Hope it's been a useful chat. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
All right, bye.
Bye bye.